And we are live. Welcome to the Standout CEO Show, gateway to building a standout business with your personal brand. And today we are talking about something that I will bet you has afflicted you in your life, which has to do with feeling like an imposter. Sometime in your life, and maybe it's happening like later on today, you'll be feeling like, oh my gosh, if people only knew that I really didn't know very much about what I'm talking about, or really didn't know about all the lack of experience I have in the job that I'm in, or whatever that is for you. And if they were to find out how little I knew, or how lacking in experience I have for doing this thing that I'm supposed to be able to do really well, they would discover that, and oh my gosh, bad thing. The sky would fall. I'd lose my job. I'd be pilloried in the public square. And this is a real fear. This is a real fear that's so pervasive that even the most successful people have admitted to having this fear of feeling like an imposter, feeling like, oh no, I'm going to be discovered. I'm going to be found out. Movie stars, politicians, people who you wouldn't expect, who have had super successful careers, still say that this is something that gets them. So I've invited Kris Kelso on today. He's right here. And he has actually written a book that covers this entire spectrum of how can you deal with this. It's called Overcome the Imposter. And we're talking about the imposter monster.
Yes.
This giant creature that lives inside almost every one of us. So I'm really excited to take a deep dive on this because Kris has really explored this. He's talked to lots of different people, done a lot of research, and really been teaching how every one of us can overcome this particular fear and or take advantage of the fear so that we can lead to our own success. So stay tuned. And Kris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brad. I'm so glad to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So as a way to start off, just describe a little bit of the landscape in terms of like how in your study, how pervasive is this feeling of being an imposter, and dive in a little bit deeper in terms of, are there certain people for whom this is, even more likely to happen? Like is there certain kind of character trait or certain kind of job title where if that's you, you're even more likely to be in this spot?
Yeah, well, you described the feeling in a very personal and really accurate way that a lot of people feel like everyone else seems to think that I know more than I do, or that I have more experience than I do, or people don't seem to realize that I'm just figuring this out as I go, that I'm really not, I don't have it all fully fleshed out yet. I've got a lot of ideas and I'm experimenting and I'm learning, but man, I really don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And this feeling of imposter syndrome, this feeling of maybe I'm a fraud, maybe I'm not legitimate, it's incredibly prevalent. In fact, one study that I looked at a bunch of studies over the last 2 decades of this, of studying this, getting ready for this book. And one of the studies said that up to 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career. So it's almost everybody. I mean, it's pretty widespread. But the really interesting statistic, the thing that is counterintuitive, but I just found really fascinating and caused me to dig a lot more, is that it tends to be more prevalent among high achievers. So
Interesting. So
the
interesting.
more ambitious you are, the more aggressive you are, the more you are stretching yourself, the more you are trying new things, right? The high achievers are always striving for more, always looking for something else. And I know for me, I love to learn. I love to try new things and learn new things. And once I master something, it tends to get a little bit boring. And so I tend to get good at something and then move on to something I'm not as good at, because the getting good is what's fun for me. But that can create a lot of that feeling of I'm never quite a master of the things that I'm doing, because I'm always moving on to something new. And so a lot of people think that imposter syndrome is something that really driven, ambitious leaders, entrepreneurs, creators, innovators, that it's something they don't deal with. That's for other people that are insecure, that are not ambitious, that are not driven. But if you think about it, people that are just content to do the same job every day, to punch a clock and work their hours and go home and just try to, collect a paycheck so they can have some fun on the weekends. And, the people that are just kind of coasting through life, they don't have a lot to feel like a fraud about. They're not aspiring to anything. And so it actually is the very driven, the very ambitious, and the people that are pushing themselves to grow that encounter this the most.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, that 70% number in my mind, it seems like certainly amongst the business leaders, that's an underreported number. That must be like 95%.
Yeah, well, being that it's more prevalent among high achievers, I think you're right that in the sort of the group of leaders and driven people, and certainly entrepreneurs, I believe it's more like 95, 98%. It's almost universal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so here we are in this situation where we feel like a fraud in some way. There's something we're doing. We're taking on a new role, or we're taking on a new task, or we're developing a new skill. All of these things are risk involved. And
yes.
Anyone who's an entrepreneur, it's your job title, risk taker. You're
Yes.
going to be taking risks, and you're
Yeah.
going to have to actually get used to the idea that this is what you're here to do. And so anytime we're in that mode of, okay, I'm metaphorically jumping off a cliff here and it's risky, or I'm taking a big step that I don't know if I'm actually going to reach to the other side of the chasm that I'm crossing. This is a place where you can be feeling doubt, and you can be feeling, misgivings about what you're about to do.
Yes.
And what will the people around you think of you should you fail?
Yes.
So I know in the book that you talk a lot about transferring this fear of failure into something that actually could be positive. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really one of the big keys. There's a couple of core principles and ideas in this book, and one of the really big ones is that in order to battle the imposter, which is the name that I give to that voice of the inner critic in our head that tries to tell us that we're a fraud, in order to battle that, in order to counteract that insecurity, we've got to reframe how we see failure and recognize that failure is learning. So there's a couple of things. Number one, failure is learning. It's the process by which we learn things. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. It's a step in the process. Because failure is learning and learning leads to success, failure is part of that process. And I give a number of examples in the book of people who failed their way to success. Famous people, notable people. One of them is a guy named Babe Ruth. Now, most Americans have heard of Babe Ruth. I used to say everyone's heard of Babe Ruth, but I've done some speaking overseas in some places where baseball is not as prevalent and people don't exactly know who that is. But for the majority of us in the U.S., at least, Babe Ruth is somebody that, even if you're not a baseball fan, you've heard of him because he was one of the greatest players of all time. And he held dozens of records. Many of his records still stand today, even long after has passed away a long time ago. And he was called the Sultan of SWAT for his home run slugging ability, that he could just really hit that ball. And but he had this other nickname that not as many people remember. But he was also in his time called the King of Strikeouts. And his career total of 1,330 strikeouts, that's over 1,000 strikeouts. That total was a Major League Baseball record for 30 years. So Babe Ruth held the record for strikeouts for 30 years until one day his record was beaten by another guy you may have heard of named Mickey Mantle. So this is an example of, these guys knew that in order to have big success, you have to take big risks, and big risks are going to come with big failures. But here's what I know about baseball. I'm not a baseball expert, but I know that when a batter is swinging at pitches, when he's watching the pitcher, that he's learning. Every time a batter misses a ball, he's learning something about that pitcher and their tells and their tendencies and the patterns of how they throw the ball. And the learning that comes from those failures is how they get to their eventual success. And so by reframing failure as not something to be feared, something to be avoided, failure is not going to take us down. It's not going to be a black mark on our career, but it's part of the process of learning our way to success. Then we can remove the fear of failure, because a lot of that imposter syndrome, a lot of that chatter in our minds is telling us to be afraid to fail. And once you can remove that fear of failure, it's really easy to push through that resistance.
Yeah, really interesting. What you're just saying about Babe Ruth reminds me of a comment I heard in an interview with the current owner of the Savannah Bananas, which is this ball team down in Georgia, which is just, they've actually created a new form of baseball. And what he was talking about is when he was a little kid and in Little League Baseball himself, his coach gave him this advice, which was swing hard, you might just hit it. It's like, that's, obviously is clearly what Babe Ruth was thinking, is like, okay, I'm going to swing. Yeah. And I'm going to swing really hard, because if I connect, it's going to knock it right out of the park. And
it's not the most technical approach, but it can work.
Like, you could definitely
it can work.
Well, the thing is that, like, when I was in Little League, and this is share my story, I was terrible at baseball, and I was actually really bad at hitting the ball. Like, there's something that I just wasn't very good at. And people, like, I literally would go up to bat, and the coach and the team members, everybody would say, don't swing, because the pitchers were so not good that it was as likely that I would get a walk as, it would be more likely that I get a walk than if I swung 3 times and struck out. Yeah. And so it was like the opposite advice for me. And interesting, the thing that happened to me was that I discovered, much to my surprise, that I had been, using the bat as a right-handed batter, because I'm right-handed. But one day in practice, I turned around and started hitting with a left-hand swing. And I'm not quite sure why, but my coordination as a left-handed batter was just so much better, and I could actually hit the ball after that. And I turned that around. Like, when I played hockey, I would play left-handed, and when I played lacrosse, I would play left-handed. And I was like, oh, look at that. Wow. My brain works in this funny way.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example of something that you might be afraid to try because failure seems obvious, right? If I tried to hit left-handed, then I would go from a poor player to a terrible player. Right. But you took a risk and you started trying something, and it actually benefited you. You actually had some unlikely success in there. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was actually a big surprise to everyone around me. It's like, oh my gosh, look, you can hit the ball. All right, so the other thing that I wanted to touch on, which really resonates with me in terms of one of the elements in your book, was all about not being the expert, like removing the mantle of trying to be the expert and being more of an explorer. So as somebody who is really into basically documentary style storytelling and the whole practice of going out into the world, searching for something that you're interested in uncovering, learning all about it, even though you're not the expert, you're like actually looking for some information about some topic that you're fascinated about, and then bringing that back and sharing that with your audience in this format is something that I've adopted and I've done for years. And my practice on social media, in fact, follows the same process, right down to this show. I am not the expert on how to stand out, as a CEO or as anybody else. This is something that I want to learn about, and I'm bringing in as many people to help sort of fill in the answer to that question as I possibly can. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what can people be doing in terms of, most people are thinking, I must be as the expert. So what's the antidote to that?
Well, first of all, I love the fact that you have created a show with a title that you are not the expert. You are not the qualified person to bring that expertise, but you created it for the purpose of gathering people, of bringing people who can teach and can learn. I think that is an incredible example of what I call the explorer mentality. And so in the book, in chapter 7 of the book, I contrast these two approaches, these two mindsets, if you will, to dealing with imposter syndrome. And the first one I call the tour guide, which is the person who has to be the expert. They follow a script. They stick to a tight set of boundaries in an area where they're very comfortable, where they have all the answers, and they stay away from the unknown. They don't leave the tour. They just follow the path, and they like to be the one who has all the answers. They don't ask questions, they answer questions. But on the other end of the spectrum, the other personality is the explorer. And this is the person who is not only comfortable with unfamiliar territory, they actually look forward to it. They enjoy getting out of their comfort zone. They enjoy getting out of their safe space, if you will, and going and exploring, because exploring is a learning process and they can get something new. And an explorer says, I don't have all the answers, but I believe I can figure out the answers. And if I don't have the skills I need, I can bring other people along who have those skills, who can help me. Maybe there's someone else who knows how to get where we're going. Maybe there's someone else who has a skill set that's going to help us along the journey that I don't have. And that's okay, because I'm in learning mode. And an explorer is that if you take a certain path and you hit a dead end, you realize it's not going to get you where you go, and you have to double back. That's not failure, that's learning. Goes back to our first conversation about failure and learning, that's a learning process that helps you build the map, that helps you explore and map new territory and cover new ground and get more out of your effort. And so that's the explorer mindset that, again, will remove that fear of failure, because failure is part of the learning process. It's how you get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, being more of an explorer really kind of lets you off the hook. You know, you no longer have to be the one who knows all the answers. I think, in fact, what's critical in terms of a skill thing that you can develop in doing this sort of exploration mode is being the one who has really good questions.
Yes.
Don't know the answers, just come up with a bunch of really good questions.
Yeah. If you can be skilled at asking great questions, then you will get a lot of great answers. You will learn a lot more by having great questions than by trying to present yourself as the expert. In fact, you learn very little when you're presenting yourself as the expert. You usually just have a bunch of people staring at you, waiting for you to give all the answers. But if you don't have them, then don't pretend you have them. Just be open and honest and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's very liberating from that point of view of it's no longer pretending. And I think this is what one of the keys in the fear of feeling like an imposter is people feel like they're pretending, or they feel like they have to pretend. That they're forced in a box where, oh my gosh, I need to look good. So even if I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to pretend that I'm knowing what you're doing. And if you're pretending, you feel like an imposter. Like you can't escape that. It's like, oh my gosh, here I am pretending, and I am a fraud.
Yes. So there's a key phrase that you can use to help you change this mindset. All right. And this phrase is very simple, but simple is not, it's very simple, but it's not always easy to use. And the phrase is, I don't know. It's hard sometimes to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. When someone sees you as the expert, maybe you're in a role or you've been brought into a situation where people are looking to you, and there's this feeling of everyone expects me to have the answers. And someone asks a question or someone presents a problem and they look to you, and you have a choice to make. You can either pretend you are the expert and try to live up to their expectations, usually by making something up or taking your best guess or trying to talk around it. Or you can very honestly, confidently, but humbly say, I don't know, but here's what I think. I don't know, but I believe we can figure it out. I don't know, but I'll bet if we pool our resources, if we work together, we can find that answer. And so there's a difference between having your confidence in the fact that you have all the answers, which usually you don't, versus having your confidence built on your ability to go find the answers. And your confidence built on your ability to pull the right people together, or like you're doing with this show, to attract experts and people with different perspectives and ideas so that you can get to the right answer at some point. But you can start by saying, I don't have this figured out yet. I don't know the answer, but I believe we can get the answer. And that is the difference between a true imposter, someone who's trying to fake it, somebody who's trying to present themselves something they're not, and an explorer mentality, an explorer who is being humbly confident and saying, I don't have all the answers. I'm not the expert in this area, but I trust that we can work together to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, we are actually getting close to the end of our time together. Goes by super fast.
Yes, it does.
And we've just barely scratched the surface. So if there is something that we haven't gotten to that you're sitting there going, oh yeah, I didn't quite get to this part. Some one thing that you would like to share with people who are listening to this episode, what would that be?
Oh man, there's so much. Yeah, there's a lot of ground that we didn't have a chance to cover, but I think if there's, what's the one thing that I should share? I'll give you one more piece of the puzzle of overcoming this imposter syndrome, and that it goes right along with that phrase, I don't know. And this is the idea that imposter syndrome is a fear of vulnerability. It's a fear of being exposed for who you really are. It's a fear that people are going to figure out what's going on the inside doesn't match their perception of you. But the antidote for imposter syndrome, the answer to the problem, is vulnerability. That when you get honest with people, when you get honest not only about your successes, but about your struggles, and not only about your strengths, but about your weaknesses, and when you lay your cards on the table and say, this is me, this is where I'm at, you destroy, you really weaken that voice of the inner critic. You take away the fear of failure, the fear of exposure, the fear of all these things. And so though vulnerability is what imposter syndrome causes you to fear, vulnerability actually is the answer. And again, I'm going to say that's really simple, but not easy. You may be sitting here listening to this going, oh my goodness, be vulnerable. That's hard. That's challenging. That's the thing I'm afraid of the most.
Right.
But I dive deeper in the book and give you all kinds of tactics and tips and ideas and examples, really concrete examples with great real world stories of how this plays out when you start to change your mindset around the fear of failure and the fear of vulnerability, and you become that humbly confident explorer.
Yeah. Be vulnerable as a way to slay the imposter monster.
Yes.
All you have to do is admit that you were a strikeout king when you were in Little League.
That's right. That's right. Acknowledge it. And then talk about what you learned in that process.
Exactly.
There's where the value is.
Exactly. Totally. Well, Kris, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on today. If people want to connect with you, or they're going, okay, I need to get that book, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I'm really easy to find online. If you can remember that my name starts with a K, K-R-I-S, Kelso, K-E-L-S-O. So I'm at kriskelso.com, and you can specifically find the book at overcomingtheimposter.com. And in fact, on that website, I will tell you that you can download a free chapter, a sample chapter of the book, and it is the chapter on the tour guide versus the explorer. So some of the stuff we've been talking about here is the sample chapter that I give away to anybody who wants it. And it is, I believe, one of the meatiest, most valuable chapters in the book. And so I'm really happy to share that with people. Even if you don't get the entire book, go download that chapter and read it. It'll help you a lot in changing your mindset and overcoming that self-doubt.
All right. Well, I'll make sure that links to both your own website and to the website for the book are in the show notes. And thanks again for coming on today. This has been fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate you having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And for people who are listening here at the end, thank you so much for tuning in today to this episode of the Standout CEO Show. And if you would like to go and binge the entire archive, just go to standoutceoshow.com and you'll find all the audio, all the video, all the show notes, and you can binge to your heart's content. And remember that the best way to join us is to join us live every Tuesday, every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And until the next time, so long.